All right, we're so lucky to have with us today the CEO and co-founder of Roam, which was previously Opibus. So if you're not familiar with it, that's why, because they've rebranded from Opibus to Roam. Thank you so much for being with us. And I guess you're at your offices in Kenya.
Yeah, that's correct. And thank you very much for having me. I'm in Nairobi right now, and this is where I spend most of my time right now is for setting up the Kenya operations.
Kind of get our viewers up to speed here. We've been following you guys for a while and reporting on you on Tesla Time News. You're a really interesting company that is, I think you're called, born in Sweden, designed in Kenya. Can you explain what you guys are doing?
I mean, our whole mission and vision is to accelerate the electric mobility developments in sub-Saharan Africa, in Eastern Africa, and now specifically in Kenya. We want to make sure that we have accessible and reliable and connected vehicles all across the board. So we focus a lot on commercial vehicles and that type of deployment, because that's where you have the highest return on investments. That's where you have the most kilometers driven, which means the highest environmental benefit as well. So we're just trying to push as many motorcycles and buses out there as possible, which is our main products right now.
So talk to me about your main products, the buses and the motorcycles. Are these things that you import, or are you building them there in Africa?
We have focused a lot on making sure that, if we want a lot of electric vehicles on the roads here, we need to build up a competence base and a capacity base. Kenya has some of the most fantastic engineers, but there is no company actually focusing on electric mobility around here. So we have said that, hey, let us start this and let's make sure that we get a lot of that experience in here and make sure that we build that. So we very strongly believe that there is all the technology for the whole transition that we need to do today exists. We have batteries, we have electric motors, we have all the components that we need to build electric vehicles. It's just about adapting them for a use case. So in the case of the motorcycle, we are very much focusing on deploying a motorcycle that is cheap and robust and has long enough range for all the uses around here. So I think to add a bit of color to but just what things look like here, motorcycles are a massive part of end-of-mile logistics, which is just like the last step when something has been shipped into Kenya, and then it makes it through a distribution center, and then it gets delivered to someone's home or house. That comes on a motorcycle. Whatever you order, it comes on a motorcycle. If you're going somewhere short distance or a bit longer distance in town, you're going on a motorcycle. And motorcycles just make up a massive part of this, all the veins in the transport network that we have around us. And if you combine, all of the mega trends happening in the world where we have population growth in a massive part of Africa, we have urbanization happening in a very, very rapid rate, then you just have the end result, which is that the only reasonable types of transport for a city like Nairobi, for a city like Kigali, for a city like Dar es Salaam is going to be buses, so public transport, because they swallow a lot of people, and two-wheelers, because they're small and they don't take up a lot of space in the whole sector. So, and on the street itself, ultimately we're a product company who really care about the experience of the product and making sure that it is a robust and reliable product that you can afford at a accessible cost.
That sounds really amazing, and it sounds so important to have a cheap motorcycle for that market. But I'm kind of confused how you're able to do it, because as Elon talks about at Tesla, mass production is really hard to do. And usually I would think of mass production as the way to get your costs down, right? As you produce more and more, economies of scale, the price goes down. But you guys are fairly small. So how do you get a inexpensive bike right out of the gate?
It's not inexpensive right out of the gate. So this still requires some volume, and it still requires some it requires volume behind it to actually hit our price targets and cost targets and targets for margin and everything around that. It is, however, a market where there is already a lot of high volume, right? So Tesla has a lot of parts that they are manufacturing themselves. We are relying on a lot of parts that already exist in high volume. Hitting the right price targets at this point is something that it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of development work, and with scale, we're going to be able to hit lower cost as well. But I think for an electric motorcycle compared to a Tesla develops a lot of their components themselves. We develop the core components ourselves and the important components ourselves so that we can hit a baseline. But today we don't have an interest in, developing things that are readily accessible and available. Tesla went the route where they said we need a touchscreen, and there is nothing on the market. So let's dig in and actually develop for this, right? Whereas we don't have to develop a touchscreen. I think it's also fair to say that an electric motorcycle is a lot easier to develop than a full car. But there is still a lot of work and a lot of engineering hours that goes into making sure that it is exactly what we want it to be. So a good product that has a full experience, a full product experience, and a good, an accessible cost and a reliable product.
Why not just go the traditional route, though, and design this and then get it manufactured in Asia somewhere?
So we're getting components manufactured in several different places around the world, right? So I'm working with contract manufacturers to make sure that they are supplying the quality that we need. When it comes to assembly, we need to own that assembly design because it's our design. We need to make sure that we put it together. And then by doing a lot of assembly here and step by step moving manufacturing over to partners here locally, we're creating a lot of jobs. We're creating a lot of job opportunities, and we're again building on what was the core of the company from the beginning. We're expanding the competence and knowledge base in this area and in this region to make sure that we do have a lot more engineers that are knowledgeable about electric mobility in the area, because that's what we need when we have a lot of electric vehicles on this road. We need to have that local expertise. I mean, this is something that is designed in Kenya for Kenya. It absolutely makes sense that it's assembled and manufactured here as well.
Well, I guess we should take a step back then. I mean, why Kenya? Like, what was the connection? You're from Sweden, so like, why Kenya?
Well, that has there is many different reasons for that. I think that the primary reason is I've been working with different type of climate topics for the past 10 years at this point, and there has been this feeling of a lot of people just saying that developing countries and emerging economies and the fastest growing economies in the world, they will just take this magic leap to this new technology. And that just doesn't happen without effort. So I decided to try and build out a team here locally instead to make sure that we can have this transition happening in an intentional way instead of accidental or magic way, right? Because it needs to be thoughtful. You need to have a product perspective where you're actually designing the product for the ground and for the local market. I also spent a couple of years here as a kid with my parents, so I have spent time around East Africa on a personal level as well. So it was very close to home to come here.
So, I mean, you brought up the point that some people think that the developing countries are going to magically switch to EVs. There is kind of the opposite end of that argument where people are saying developing countries are not going to be switching to EVs or clean renewable energy fast at all. And so the problem with that means is that I shouldn't have to get an electric car or have to get solar panels, or we shouldn't have to worry about renewable energy because those darn developing countries, no matter what we do, they are never going to be able to switch to clean energy. And so for all the solar panels and wind turbines that we put up here, there's no point in us trying because the developing nations will still emit all the carbon that's going to put us over the edge. And so what's the big deal and why should we worry about it? And so I think that there is this balance between like what is going to happen with developing countries. The future is still very much up in the air, and you're working on a very key solution to transitioning them kind of ahead of the rest of the world, relatively speaking.
I recognize that argument, and it is quite outdated as well. I mean, that's not an actual argument in any kind of like true sense, right? That's just a cop-out argument so that you don't have to do anything yourself. Kenya's energy system is 80% renewables. What is that like for the US? It's probably not even close. There is a lot of emerging economies that are progressing very, very fast. And why wouldn't they? I mean, renewable energy is cheaper. electric mobility is cheaper. We're at a point where we're almost hitting price parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. And if you can just do some smart financing solutions on there to make sure that you deploy the vehicles, you will save money. And who doesn't like to save money? And there's around, but what we've seen so far, and what I've seen so far on a personal level, is that people are not as stubborn around here. I mean, in Sweden and in the US, there is a lot of petrol heads. There is a lot of people who are, very fond of a engine making noise, right? Around here, it's very practical. Do you save money? Okay, cool. Let me buy an electric motorcycle because that sounds like I want to save money. Don't you want to save money?
So help me paint a picture of what Africa looks like, because I think that our media, whether it be TV, movies, even the news, doesn't really give us a good sense of what's going on in Africa. It's either a very old-fashioned movies, Steamboat Up the Nile kind of view of Africa, or it's like Wakanda, and you're like, okay, I know it's not either of these.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people who are actually born and raised there that probably paints a better picture, but I can paint one from my perspective. And the first one is just that the fact that you're referring to it as Africa just as one part of the issue, right? Because it's so extremely diverse. And I spent most of my time in East Africa and South Africa, right? And then I've been around in a couple of different countries, and just between neighboring country to neighboring country, it's vastly different. Between region to region, it's vastly different in terms of development stage, in terms of all different indicators, right? You have Nairobi, where I am now, which is an amazing city, and you have it's a extremely modern city, and there's a lot of it's like being in any other city, and then you have these small things that like highlights you to the fact that you're in a different type of culture altogether. It might be how the sidewalks look, or the lack of sidewalks in some places, or it might be potholes or lack of potholes, or just the fact that the city is ever evolving. And I think that's why it's so hard for the Western world to keep up, is because, one, there's a picture of a lot of African countries from the 70s that are still perpetuated all throughout, and be it Salvation Army that come home with pictures to their local communities of what things look like in the rural areas, but they miss out what things look like in the urbanized areas, and in cities, and smaller cities, bigger cities. It's just such a wide mix of development happening everywhere. And I'm not a development scientist. That's not my thing, right? I'm just trying to create products for a country that's developing in a very fast pace, which also means that we need to have a fast pace of developing those products, right? So I think when it comes to painting a picture of what things are here, I think the best solution is just to go here with an open mind, because it's different than anything that you would ever imagine. It's different than any kind of perspective and picture that I could ever give.
Well, that was kind of my next question is, my view of Africa, which I'm sure is wrong, is like, oh, well, the road system and the electrical grid system are probably not going to be able to support EVs. But like, paint us a picture, because you guys are working on making buses and electric motorcycles. And is the infrastructure there? How does it work?
I mean, the infrastructure for everything that we're doing right now, the infrastructure is there. So together with the buses are super simple, right? And then this is one of my favorite pet peeves, because I think that this is what like Sweden, Europe, the US did wrong, because we went so hard on individual transport and personalized transport, and this kind of thing where, hey, Nissan is going to deploy an electric vehicle that everybody's going to buy, and Tesla's going to come out with their Model 3 and those kind of things. And we've always been in this sort of development stage to get to a point where individualized transport is cheap and accessible with electric vehicles. And that's great now that we're here, but we've lost so many years on like the commercial side of things, because like a truck or a bus, they drive very specific routes, and your return on investment on an electric vehicle is going to be directly correlated to your kilometers that you drive, right? Because you pay more for the upfront for the electric car, or electric vehicle of any kind than you do for the petrol version, but you save per liter or per gallon in the US, and that just translates to a per kilometer or per miles saving, right? And who drives the most? It's not the private cars that stand still for 95% of the time. It's definitely the commercial vehicles. So a bus will do, they might just do a stretch of 40 kilometers, but they do it 10 times per day in and day out, week in and week out. So they very, very, very quickly rack up the kilometers. Buses also have a much easier way of deploying charging infrastructure, right? Because what we need to do is just to do one charger in each end. And that's it. Because you only have a point A and a point B, and then you go back and forth. So that's a lot of how we are doing. We're sizing the battery packs to make sure that we can actually fit it in. We're working with great people all across the world to make sure that we get these buses in. We have a lot to say in the product development of them, and in the design of them, and the engineering of them. And then the different components are manufactured in different places of the world. They're bought here and they're assembled here. And then we size the battery pack depending on the route that we're going to drive, because that way we can also lower the cost. If you're only going to drive, let's say 40 kilometers, it might be enough for you to have a 120 kilometer battery in there, which is quite sizable for a bus because they are big and heavy, as we all might be familiar with. This adaptation of the bus just it makes it cheaper, it makes it more suitable for the whole display of it. And then after you've driven your first 40 kilometers, you stop there, you charge, you load it up with passengers again, and you might stop there for 20 minutes. And with fast enough charging, you're back up to full or to 80% or wherever you want to be.
So what about quality of life? It seems like diesel buses are the worst. I mean, they're sitting there idling, spewing, black smoke into people's lungs. And the same thing with the motorbikes. I think that a lot of people don't picture cities just packed with gas-powered motorbikes and how dirty and loud that is. What's the impact going to be on a city like Kenya if they switch to EVs?
Hopefully positive. That's all what we're trying to do. I mean, climate change is ultimately a health question. It comes down to either access to water or access to food or clean air or being safe from extreme weather events in all kinds of different ways. All the different ways that climate change impacts us comes down to a health question, and local pollution levels are included in that. So I mean, how it's going to impact is not really my biggest concern at this point, because I know that it's going to have a positive impact, and that's what I'm focused on. And that's why we are also pushing so hard on trying to deploy as many vehicles as possible at the right, cost and quality level, so that we can avoid as many emissions as possible.
Let's talk about cost for a second. Your motorcycle that you can sell with the single battery, which should give you about 100 kilometers of range, is $1,500.
That's amazing.
How did you do that? Because I've been testing out lots of different e-bikes, lots of different electric motorcycles.
Let's look at the Sondor's Metacycle, which I thought was a really reasonably priced motorcycle that we're getting, and that's $5,000
right,
with a similar range. So how did you do it?
I mean, it's about how you design for it. It's about how you choose your suppliers. We've done a lot of due diligence on who we're working with, what kind of prices. I think a majority of it is that this is not a sports motorcycle, right? It's not comparative to the Sondor's motorcycle, because the Sondor's is much more of a performance version. It has a lot more bells and whistles on it. We're talking about robust, simple, efficient bikes that have one task, and that is to work day in and day out, drive 100 kilometers, drive 200 kilometers per day after day, week after week, right? You don't need to be able to drive it as a sports bike. And that's like the closest competition that we have today is not a KTM bike or Yamaha bike or whatever it is. It's cheap petrol motorcycles from India.
It just seems to me that, I understand that there are the motorcycle market in the US is based around performance and sport. I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that you have to make up for having a loud motorcycle that requires a lot of maintenance. And so, yeah, they do, if I am going to get on a motorcycle and kind of risk my life, at least I'm going to have fun doing it. And if I do get into an accident, I'm going to die. Like, that's what I always hear from people who ride motorcycles. Well, if I get into an accident, that'll be it. It's like, whoa, okay. But I think that when it can be electric and it can be quiet and it can be reliable and cheap, I feel like your design, you could in some ways bring it to the US and say, look, this is not a sports bike. This is not a high performance adrenaline junkie thing. This is going to get you to and from the place that you want to go every day with the reliability.
So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get him to bring the bike to the US.
I kind of want one. Like I've experienced, we've tested out like an electric moped recently, and it doesn't have amazing specs or anything like that. It doesn't even have the range here. I was just so blown away by how usable it could be, and I can totally see how something that you develop for the Kenyan market could in the future, when people are going like, yeah, electric vehicles, why am I paying money for transportation?
Right.
I am done with, as soon as we get past this legacy model of like, a car means freedom, I think that a lot of people are going to go, how do I get the cheapest form of electric transportation possible? Is it, electric robotaxi individual things? Is it electric buses, or is it electric motorcycles like this?
And I mean, I do definitely think, I'm not going to speculate into where we bring the products after the Kenyan markets, but I think exactly like you're saying, there is definitely a case for markets outside of Kenya, outside of large parts of Africa or India, for example. There are definitely markets in Europe and America for the type of product that we have developed. I'm just not going to do it right now.
Now, can you share with us, the company was founded in 2017. It started as a research project in Sweden at a university. Can you kind of tell us how you've grown from 2017 till now and what your plans are for the next few years?
So we founded in 2017, and we said, hey, we want to make sure that we can create this evolution of electric vehicles for emerging markets. So gung ho, we set out to build the first prototype in Sweden. We did our first couple of sales, and we moved down here. Our initial market was a safari market that we did for a while to make sure that we could get revenue, start building expertise around that. It was quite simple vehicles to make sure that we could transition into what we're doing today, which is the more large-scale commercial focus. But that allowed us a runway of money at a time where nobody wanted to invest in electric vehicles in anything related to Africa or Kenya. There was no money here for it. There were no grant for it. There was no debt for it. So we had to bootstrap the whole thing for the first 2.5 years. And we grew it, step by step. We came down a few people. And we very quickly hired out our Kenyan team. And then since then, we have been growing it step by step. First, 40 people and 60 people. And now we are just north of around 100 people in the past, 4 years that we've been in the country. And we started to raise money in the beginning of 2020, which was a very good move. Closed our first round in March 2020. And we were initially thinking about using that as development money. And that came very, very handy as a sort of a COVID treasury to make sure that we could keep the company alive, keep everyone employed, and continue developing as most of the markets were dead for most of 2020.
Now, were you surprising your investors and potential investors with the successes that you've had? So are there more investors interested now that they're like, oh, this guy was right, there is a market for this there?
Yes. I mean, since we started in 2017, not single-handedly, because there is a couple of other companies as well, but there has been a big craze happening, and electric mobility in Eastern Africa is now the hottest thing on the market. So we're seeing a lot of interest from both Silicon Valley and Europe, and a lot of African-based funds and VC firms and etc. So we're seeing interest from all across the board.
Do you think you kind of have a moat right now because no one really knows about what you're doing? And if they do know about it, they're like, well, I don't want to set up business in Kenya. Or do you think that companies in the US and Europe and China will be like, oh, let's take a look at what Rome is doing. Let's move in there and start selling our wares there?
No, I think the I think that there is a barrier to entry in Kenya that is not logical. It's not based on reason. It's just based on a fear of the unknown and a lack of conviction that this is a great market, which it is. I mean, we're seeing a lot of similar financial tendencies here as we saw in China in the 90s. There is a lot of development happening. There is a lot of really, really great talent here as well. So it's relatively easy to set up business, but a lot of people are afraid of doing so because it is unknown. Because everything, like you're saying, it's referred to as Africa. It's referred to as like you don't really know the nuances and the differences if you have great product ideas or something they want to launch. But on the other hand, I mean, there is an amazing amount of really, really great entrepreneurs here that are Kenyan as well, right? That I think should be honored in any kind of conversation around entrepreneurship. I mean, we happen to do electric mobility. There is a bunch of other Kenyan companies who do electric mobility as well, not to the same scale, but they all have different products and different solutions. And there is a lot of really, really talented entrepreneurs that are bringing great solutions to the market. Nairobi is very much of a software city. There is a huge amount of software companies around here, and as well as globally known companies that you wouldn't really know are Kenyans as well. That oh, hey, I know that company. Oh, okay, they're based here. This is their headquarters. This is where they're operating out of from. So I think there's a lot of mix in it's hard to predict how entrepreneurship in this area is going to move on and who's going to come in from the outside. We always have to answer questions to investors about what about these OEMs and what about these OEMs and who's going to come in and compete with you, and what happens when this big Indian motorcycle manufacturer decides to do electric motorcycles for East Africa or Kenya or Sub-Saharan Africa or wherever it is, but they still haven't.
But what about companies that maybe I'm not keeping up with perfectly, but I know seem to be moving pretty fast, like BYD? I know that they sell a lot of buses in Asia and even in Europe and the United States. Yeah, what about Tata Motors, who I seem to only hear good things about? And what about Tesla? Like, do you think, I mean, you just said that basically they haven't moved in yet, but do you think that at some point they're going to decide, hey, Kenya is a great market, we should get in, we should sell buses, we should be selling electric cars?
I think they will, and I think they should. I mean, this market is way too big for us to take it on alone. We need some help in this transition, right? If we were alone responsible for the sustainable transport transition that needs to happen across Kenya or East Africa or the rest of Africa or the world, right? That would be a very, very hard task. We need more actors here, and we need that competition. That's good. I mean, competition is also great for me because that indicates that there is a market for it. If it's only us, then that would create some issues. I do think that BYD is too expensive for this market, and they're much more focused on selling to Europe currently. So they have a large internal Chinese market, and they're selling a lot of buses to Europe. They're not necessarily that interested in this area. Right?
Let's talk about your buses for a second. I mean, I'm taking a look at one of them now, and you said like it's a very simple machine, but I mean, it looks like a bus and it looks awesome. How are you able to get the price down? And tell me a little bit about your specs and pricing and who you're selling them to.
Well, so I mean, one of the main ways that we get the price down is exactly like I explained earlier, that we can customize the battery size, right? A BYD bus might always come equipped with 400 kilowatt hours, and if you don't need 400 kilowatt hours, okay, there might be one more option. We can customize a bit in between different sizes just to make sure that it is relevant for the route that you're driving. Instead of having a battery that can last you the full day, you have a battery that maybe lasts you 2 hours. But that's enough, because after that you can charge, and you do have access to charging. So we're focusing on making sure that charging is just much more accessible. So we're trying to make sure that we have a full solution that can just work with work for the user and for whoever's operating that line, instead of saying, hey, here's a 400 kilometer range bus.
I didn't realize that Americans, Europeans, by and large, want to make sure all the bases are covered, like you said. And here, because people in Kenya sound like they're more pragmatic, you can sell them what they need, not what they don't need. I mean, like the argument goes for EVs
or the undercoat. Like, you want to get the undercoat?
Right.
It's like that.
Or
it's
like
yes,
the fact that most Americans say they need an EV with a range of 400 or 500 miles, and it's like, no, you don't.
Right.
You're hardly ever going to use it, but you spent a fortune to get it.
Right.
I think that's exactly what you were mentioning on the motorcycle, that it can't make sense for an American market because it's simple means of transport. It also relates to how when engineers are fresh out of uni or wherever they're studying, or they're doing a course on some kind of infrastructure system, they're like, this is the best way to build this type of infrastructure on, or this is the best way to engineer this system, this society on, and do plumbing. And we forget that we have a social heritage, we have a financial heritage, we have all of these investments into different parts. So you're not going to build a perfect system. You're putting a patch onto a existing system, and that's very much the case in Europe and the US. It's less the case here, but we have this strange tradition, and specifically the US, and it's coming more and more to Europe, where people want big cars. And why do you want the big car? It's a ridiculous thing to lug this 2-ton a piece of metal around to transport a 70 kilo person. Or it's like, why would we do that? Why do you need a 500 kilometer car? How often do you actually use it? Why not have a 100 kilometer motorcycle, or a bicycle, or a 400 kilo car? That's more than enough. And that's also going to cost you less batteries, and it's going to cost you less in total investment amount, because it's just simpler. But we do have a heritage of how we're doing things, and people want big cars, and people want to be able to drive far. And we might think that, that is ridiculous how much we want, but that's still what people are going to buy. And maybe we'll change that at some point. I do hope so, because there's a lot of resource use that goes to ridiculous things. And I think that's where, there is a lot of people in Kenya that are a lot more pragmatic on how they do transport and how you use your vehicles. We might see it might be trending more towards simplicity here, or it might trend more towards a American way of having big cars. I mean, a lot of cars are very big here. There's a lot of off-road cars, because here you actually do go off-road. If you want to go out for the weekend, you actually do go off-road, and you might not do that as much in the US. But I mean, it's very fascinating, right? To see all of these trends going back and forth and things shifting. And I do hope that we can maybe find a more lenient, smaller way of doing transport. Because we are literally just talking about 70 to 100 kilos of meat lumps going around as humans, right?
It really is interesting talking to you. I really find it fascinating. You're a founder of a company that's thinking different. You're disrupting, not only because you're doing electric vehicles, but because you're doing it in a different place and in a different way. And I really think that that's super important for people to think about. It's that there's so many disruptions going on, and disruptions within disruptions, and that you're kind of a living case in point in that. For people watching now who are investors, people who are excited about what you're doing, can you tell us going forward, are there any crowdfunding rounds coming up, or your thoughts of going public, or some way that people could invest in your company or help with your company?
Right. So, I mean, if people want to help out in any way or get in touch, like go to roamotors.com, send us a message on there. We are going to kick off a new fundraise in a little while. So if you're a VC firm that you're interested, do get in touch, and like we can chat and we can see what kind of value add you would bring to the table, and how you would be able to help us out. We're not going to do a crowdfunding round anytime soon, and we're probably not going to go public in any relevant time frame for this episode, but I can promise you to come back when we're thinking about that.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today, Philip. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you guys for having me. It's been a great pleasure.